My Lord Duke, surely there is a mistake in your gaze, Baron Gawain Stonecliff murmured, his voice dripping with an oil-slick charm that made the candle flames shiver. He gestured with a manicured hand toward the girl in the center of the room, a vision in azure silk and pearls. Why settle for the shadow, for the withered leaf, when the sun stands bright before you? Take the pretty one. Xandria was born to be a duchess. Zaradine was born merely to serve her. Helion, the Duke of Duskmoor, did not blink. He adjusted his gloves, his voice a low roll of thunder that silenced the room. I do not require a sun that burns everyone in its orbit, my lord. I require a wife who knows the dark and has learned to light her own way through it. Chapter 1. The Dust of Stonecliff Manor. The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday, carried by a footman in livery so dark it seemed to swallow the afternoon light. By Wednesday, Stonecliff Manor was in a state of hysteria that rivaled the time the chimney caught fire in '84. Zaradine Stonecliff stood in the corner of the drawing room, clutching a ledger against her chest like a shield. She was 22, though her father, Baron Gawain, often joked she had been born 40. Her gown was a distinct shade of dove gray, washed so many times it bordered on ghost white, mended at the cuffs with stitches so tiny they were invisible to the naked eye. Invisibility was Zaradine's trade. It was her armor and her curse. "It is Duskmoor," her sister Xandria breathed, spinning in front of the cheval mirror. The glass reflected a creature of golden curls and flushed, peaches and cream skin. Xandria was 19 and possessed the kind of beauty that made grown men stumble over ottomans. Helion Duskmoor. The man is a legend. They say he owns half of Northumberland and hasn't smiled since the regent was in nappies. He is coming to inspect the investments father manages for him, Zaradine said quietly, her voice a soft alto that rarely rose above a whisper. She consulted her ledger. And to discuss the renewal of the leasing rights on the Westvale mines. "Investments," Baron Gawain scoffed, striding into the room with the energy of a man who smelled gold. He was handsome in a ruined sort of way, his face lined by years of gambling debts and too much port. "Don't be thick, girl. A duke like Helion doesn't travel 3 days in a carriage just to talk about coal. He's looking for a wife. The rumors from London say he needs an heir before the year is out to secure the entailment against that wretched cousin of his, Jareth Hollowhall." Gawain stopped in front of Xandria, seizing her chin and tilting her face to the light. "And you, my pet, are the bait." Zaradine looked down at her shoes. She knew what this meant. It meant sleepless nights ensuring the linens were boiled to perfection, the silver polished until it stung the eyes, and the menus curated to French standards on a rustic English budget. It meant she would be the engine room of this seduction, hidden below deck, while Xandria sailed the ship. "Zaradine!" Gawain barked, making her jump. "Get that ink stain off your finger. You look like a clerk. When the Duke arrives, I want you visible only when necessary. Pour the tea, silence the dogs, and vanish. Do not bore him with your talk of books or your melancholia." "Yes, father," Zaradine said. She didn't have melancholia. She had exhaustion. For the last 5 years, since their mother, the gentle Lady Isoria, had passed, Zaradine had run Stonecliff Manor. She balanced the accounts, negotiated with the tenant farmers, and hid the worst of her father's debts from the creditors who occasionally hammered on the back door. She was the glue, holding their crumbling aristocracy together. Yet to her father, she was merely the packaging that the glue came in, necessary but discarded once the object was fixed. The arrival happened 2 days later. The carriage that rolled up the gravel drive was black, crestless, and drawn by 4 bays that looked strong enough to pull a mountain. Zaradine watched from the library window, hidden behind a velvet curtain, heavy with dust. She saw a man step out. He was tall, imposingly so, wearing a greatcoat that swirled around his ankles in the biting wind. He didn't wear a hat. His hair was dark, windblown, and his face was a landscape of harsh angles and unforgiving lines. This was Helion, the Duke of Duskmore. Behind him stepped a man who moved with the precise, silent economy of a lifelong servant. This would be Isambard Westvale, the Duke's legendary valet, a man rumored to know more secrets than the crown itself. Zaradine felt a strange shiver, not of fear, but of recognition. She watched the Duke pause on the steps. He didn't look at the grand facade of the house, which Gawain had paid to have repainted just yesterday. He looked down at the garden beds, where Zaradine had fought a losing battle against the frost to keep the white roses alive. He reached out, touching a withered bloom with a gloved hand, lingering there for a second too long. Then he looked up, straight at the library window. Zaradine gasped and jerked back, her heart hammering against her ribs. He couldn't have seen her. The glass was old and warped, the room dark. But for a second, she had felt the weight of a gaze that was physically heavy, like a stone placed in her palm. "He is here!" Xandria shrieked from the hallway. "Zaradine, my ribbon is twisted! Fix it! Fix it now!" Zaradine smoothed her gray skirt, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the library. The performance was about to begin. Dinner that evening was a battlefield disguised as a meal. The dining room, usually drafty and smelling of damp wood, had been transformed. Zaradine had utilized every trick she knew: beeswax candles to mask the scent, ivy woven through the candelabras to hide the tarnished silver, and a roast pheasant that had cost her own personal savings to procure from the village poacher. Baron Gawain sat at the head of the table, his face flushed with wine and ambition. Xandria sat to his right, shimmering in blue, laughing a little too loudly at everything the Duke said. Or rather, everything the Duke didn't say. Helion Duskmore was a void at the center of the table. He ate sparingly, his movements precise. He answered Gawain's blustering questions with monosyllables. "So, Your Grace," Gawain boomed, slicing into the pheasant. "You must find the country air refreshing after the smog of London? Xandria adores the outdoors. She walks 5 miles a day, don't you, darling?" Xandria, who considered walking to the carriage a strenuous activity, batted her lashes. "Oh, yes. I find nature so inspiring." Helion turned his head slowly. His eyes were a startling shade of gray, like storm clouds over the ocean. "Indeed. And what flora is currently in bloom in the mesmerizing gardens of Stonecliff, Lady Xandria?" Xandria froze. Her smile faltered. The flowers. The pretty ones. Red ones?" Silence stretched, painful and thin. Hellebores, a soft voice cut through the tension. Every head turned. Zaradine was seated at the far end of the table, almost in the shadows. She hadn't meant to speak. It was a reflex. "Hellebores, Your Grace," Zaradine repeated, her cheeks heating as she realized she had drawn attention to herself. "And winter aconite. The frost took the roses yesterday, but the hellebores thrive in the cold." Helion looked at her. Really looked at her. It was the first time he had acknowledged her presence since the introductions. He studied the high collar of her dress, the ink stain she hadn't quite managed to scrub from her thumb, the intelligent, terrified look in her eyes. "Thrive in the cold," Helion repeated slowly. "A useful trait." "Zaradine helps the gardeners," Gawain interjected quickly, waving a dismissive hand. "She prefers the dirt. Xandria, however, plays the pianoforte like an angel. Perhaps she will play for us after dinner." The conversation was steered violently back to Xandria's fictitious virtues, but the air had changed. Isambard, standing silently behind the Duke's chair, caught Zaradine's eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The disaster happened when the courses were being cleared. One of the maids, young and terrified of the Duke, stumbled as she reached for a heavy tureen. The porcelain vessel tipped. It was aiming straight for the Duke's lap. In a blur of motion, Zeradine, who had risen to help, shoved her own hand into the path of the scalding soup. Crash. The tureen shattered on the floor. Hot broth soaked Zaradine's sleeve, scalding the skin beneath. She bit back a scream, turning it into a sharp, strangled gasp. "Clumsy fool!" Gawain roared, leaping up and striking the maid across the face. "Get out, you're dismissed!" "It was my fault, father," Zeradine said through gritted teeth, clutching her burning arm. "I bumped her. Please. It was me." "You?" Gawain sneered, his facade of the benevolent patriarch slipping. "Always clumsy, Zeradine. Look at this mess. You've ruined the evening." "The evening is not ruined." Helian's voice cut through the noise like a blade. He stood up. He did not look at the spilled soup. He did not look at the weeping maid or the furious baron. He walked around the table to Zeradine. He reached out and gently took her uninjured arm. "Isambard. Cold water and linen. Now." "Why?" "At once, your grace." The valet vanished. "My lord, you needn't trouble yourself with her," Gawain stammered, realizing he was losing control of the narrative. "Zeradine is used to, accidents. Zandria, take the Duke to the drawing room. Play him that sonata." "I do not wish to hear a sonata," Helion said, his eyes locked on Zaradine's face. He saw the pain she was hiding, but more than that, he saw the dignity. She wasn't crying. She was standing straight, accepting the blame to save a servant, enduring the burn to save his coat. "I wish," Helion said, "to speak with Lord Stonecliffe in his study." "Immediately." Gawain blinked, confused but hopeful. "Ah, the business matters or personal matters?" "Personal," Helion said. Gawain grinned, a predatory expression. He shot a triumphant look at Zandria. He thought the deal was done. He thought the Duke wanted to negotiate the bride price for the golden child. Zeradine, cradling her arm, watched them leave. She felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. She knew her father would sell Zandria to the highest bidder, but for some reason, the thought of this dark, intense man marrying her sister made her chest ache with a sorrow she couldn't name. The study smelled of stale tobacco and desperation. Baron Gawain poured 2 heavy glasses of brandy, his hands trembling slightly with anticipation. "I know why you asked for this private audience, your grace," Gawain began, leaning back in his leather chair. "You have seen the quality of the stock. Zandria is a rare prize. Educated, though not to the point of annoyance. Beautiful, as any man with eyes can see, and healthy, perfect for bearing heirs." Helion stood by the fireplace, watching the embers die. He hadn't touched his brandy. "She is very beautiful, Lord Stonecliffe. A standard rose." "Exactly," Gawain beamed. "And as her father, I must ensure her future is secure. The settlement—" "I wish to offer for your daughter," Helion interrupted. Gawain slapped the desk. "Done. I knew it. A man of your discernment. We can have the papers drawn up tomorrow. £50,000 settlement, and the land rights to the Westvale mines transferred to her dowry, naturally." "You misunderstand," Helion turned. The firelight cast half his face in shadow, making him look like a vengeful god. "I am not offering for Zandria." Gawain froze, his glass halfway to his mouth. "I beg your pardon." "I am offering for Zeradine." The silence that followed was so profound, one could hear the settling of the house's foundation. Gawain stared at the Duke, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. "Zeradine?" Gawain whispered. Then he let out a short, sharp laugh. "You jest, your grace. Zeradine? She is 22. She is plain. She has no accomplishments. She reads too much and speaks too little. She is the shelf stock, my lord, not the display." "She caught the scalding broth to save a servant you would have beaten," Helion said softly, She knows the names of the flowers that survive the frost. And she manages this estate, does she not? I saw the ledgers in the library. The handwriting in them matches the ink on her fingers. Gawain flushed purple. That is women's work, housekeeping. That does not make a duchess. It makes a ruler, Helion countered. I need a partner, Stonecliff, not an ornament. My life at Duskmoor is complicated. It requires strength. Xandria would wither in a week. Zeradin has already survived a lifetime of winter here. Gawain stood up, his greed warring with his confusion. But the scandal. People will talk. They will say I tricked you. They will say you were mad. Let them talk. My offer is this. I will marry Zeradin. I will take her with me to Duskmoor within the fortnight. In exchange, I will forgive your debts to my estate, all of them, and I will grant you the renewal on the mines. Gawain's eyes widened. The debts were astronomical. This was a fortune. He looked at the Duke, then at the door. He didn't care about Zeradin's happiness, or Xandria's. He cared about the gold. Take the pretty one. Gawain tried one last time, a weak reflex. Xandria really is. My offer is for Zeradin. Or I leave tonight and I call in your debts by morning. Done, Gawain gasped. She's yours. Upstairs, Isambard was wrapping Zeradin's arm in cool, salved bandages. The valet had hands as gentle as a nursemaid's. Does it hurt much, miss? He asked. Only a little, Zeradin lied. She hissed as he tightened the linen. Isambard, why is he really here? Men like him, they don't come to places like this without a reason. Isambard looked at her, his expression unreadable. The Duke is a man tired of lies, Miss Stonecliff. He has spent 10 years in London society, surrounded by people who smile while holding knives behind their backs. He has come looking for something true. The door flew open. Xandria burst in, her face flushed with victory. They are done! Father is coming up. Oh, Zeradin, imagine I shall be a duchess. I will have to order new silks immediately. You must help me pack. And you'll come with me, won't you? I'll need a companion, and you know how I hate strange maids. Zeradin felt a heavy stone of resignation settle in her gut. Of course. Xandria the Duchess, Zeradin the spinster companion. It was the only future she had ever imagined. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hall. Baron Gawain appeared in the doorway. He looked strange, pale, sweaty, and oddly furious. Father, Xandria smiled, posing slightly. Did he ask? Is it settled? Gawain looked at Xandria. Then his gaze slid to Zeradin, sitting on the edge of the bed in her ruined dress, arm bandaged, looking small and gray. It is settled, Gawain spat. He pointed a shaking finger at Zeradin. You, pack your things. I told you she would come as my companion, Xandria clapped. No, Gawain snarled. Not as your companion, you fool girl. As his wife, Xandria's smile froze. The room went dead silent. Zeradin stood up, her legs trembling. Father, she whispered. He chose you, Gawain said, the words tasting like bile in his mouth. God knows why. He wants the drab little mouse. He wants you. He turned to Xandria, whose face was crumpling into shock and rage. And you are nothing. You couldn't even charm a man when you were the only beauty in the room. No, Xandria screamed, stamping her foot. It's a lie, it's a joke. Zeradin couldn't breathe. She looked at Isambard. The valet gave her a small, solemn bow. Congratulations, Your Grace, Isambard said softly. The title hit her like a physical blow. Your Grace. She was to be the Duchess of Duskmoor. She was to marry the Stormcloud in the greatcoat. And as she looked at her father's hateful face and her sister's jealous tears, Zeradin realized with a jolt of terrifying clarity. She was leaving this cage. But she had no idea if she was walking into a palace or a prison. The journey to Northumberland was a blur of gray skies and rattling wheels. For 3 days, Zeradine sat opposite Hillian in the carriage, a small expanse of velvet upholstery separating them. Yet it felt like an ocean. He spoke of politics, of the tenants, of the history of the land, impersonal topics that he wielded like a shield. He did not speak of affection. He did not speak of why he had chosen her, beyond that single, cryptic comment about the dark. When Duskmoor finally broke the horizon, Zeradine stopped breathing. It was not a house. It was a fortress of black stone rising from the crags of the coastline, battered by the North Sea spray. Turrets stabbed the sky, and gargoyles peered down with eroded, mossy faces. It was magnificent, terrifying, and utterly devoid of warmth. "It is not a gentle place," Hillian said, watching her face closely as the carriage rumbled through the iron gates. "It does not forgive weakness. Do you wish to turn back, Zeradine? The horses are not yet tired." Zeradine looked at the looming structure, then at the man who owned it, a man who looked as weathered and lonely as the stone itself. "I have lived in a house that pretended to be a palace while rotting from the inside, Your Grace. I prefer a fortress that admits what it is." A flicker of something, respect, perhaps, crossed Hillian's eyes. "Then welcome home, Duchess." The arrival was a military operation. Isambard opened the door before the wheels had fully stopped. A line of servants stood on the steps, their breath misting in the frigid air. They were not the ragged, terrified staff of Stonecliff. These were disciplined, uniformed, and watched Zeradine with eyes that assessed rather than judged. "Mrs. Halloway," Hillian nodded to the housekeeper, a woman with steel-gray hair and a spine like a ramrod. "This is the Duchess. She speaks with my voice. What she commands is law. Your Grace, Mrs." Halloway curtsied, her expression unreadable. "Welcome, Your Grace. We had not expected a mistress so soon." "Necessity dictates speed," Hillian said shortly. He turned to Zeradine. "I have urgent matters in the West Wing. Isambard will show you to your chambers. Dinner is at 8. Do not dress for company, there is none." And with that, he was gone, striding into the shadows of the great hall, his greatcoat billowing behind him like the wings of a raven. Zeradine was left standing in the cavernous entryway, the silence settling around her like dust. She felt small, drab, and entirely out of her depth. "If you will follow me, Your Grace," Isambard said gently. Her chambers were in the east wing, overlooking the churning sea. They were clearly the rooms of the previous Duchess. Hillian's mother, perhaps. The furniture was heavy oak, the tapestries faded scenes of hunts and battles. It was grand, but it was cold. A fire had been lit, but it struggled against the chill seeping from the stone walls. "The Duke! Does he always work so late?" Zeradine asked, as Isambard placed her meager trunk at the foot of the massive four-poster bed. "The Duke carries the weight of the county on his shoulders," Isambard replied, smoothing a wrinkle in the bedspread. "And he fights battles that are not always visible on a map." Zeradine frowned. "Isambard, why does everyone look at me as if I am a ghost? Or a victim?" The valet paused at the door. "Because, Your Grace, the last 3 women who sought to marry the Duke left within a week. They said the house was haunted." "Is it?" Isambard met her gaze. "Not by ghosts, madam, by memories, and by the living who refused to let them die." 2 weeks passed. Zeradine did not see her husband before noon and rarely after dinner. He was a phantom in his own house, leaving early to inspect the mines or locking himself in the West Wing. A part of the castle Zeradine had been subtly but firmly steered away from. Left to her own devices, Zeradine did what she had always done. She made herself useful. She began with the linens. She reorganized the linen closets, which had fallen into a state of chaotic disrepair. She audited the kitchen ledgers, finding that the butcher had been overcharging the estate for 3 years, and swiftly corrected the matter with a polite but terrifyingly firm letter. She learned the names of every maid, footman, and scullery boy. Slowly, the ice began to thaw. A fire appeared in the morning room before she asked for it. Fresh lavender was placed on her pillow. The staff realized that their new mistress might be quiet, but she saw everything. It was in the library, a 2-story cathedral of books, that she found the letters. She was searching for a history of the county when a loose floorboard under the window seat shifted. Curious, Zeradine pried it up. Beneath lay a small bundle of letters tied with a black ribbon. They were not old. She knew she shouldn't read them, but the silence of the house was driving her mad. She untied the ribbon. "Cousin," the first letter began, the handwriting jagged and aggressive. "The tremors are worsening, are they not? I saw your hand shake at the assembly. You cannot hide it forever. The rot is in the blood. Abdicate, Hellion. Let me take the burden. If you marry, if you inflict this curse on an heir, you are a monster." It was signed J. H. Zeradine's heart hammered. Tremors. Rot in the blood? Interesting reading material, Zeradine gasped, dropping the letter. Standing in the doorway was a man she had never seen, yet instantly recognized. He had Hellion's dark hair, but where Hellion was granite and storm, this man was oil and silk. He was handsome, undeniably so, but his smile did not reach his eyes. "You must be the little mouse my cousin bought from Baron Stonecliffe," the man said, strolling into the room. He picked up the fallen letter. "Ah, my correspondence. I wondered where Hellion hid these." "You are Jareth Hollowhall," Zeradine said, standing up. She clasped her hands to stop them from shaking. "You are trespassing." "Trespassing? In my future home?" Jareth laughed. He circled her, looking her up and down with open disdain. "I heard he picked the plain one. I thought it was a joke, but I see the logic now. A woman like you, grateful, quiet. You won't ask questions when he disappears for days. You won't notice when he starts to lose his mind." "My husband is not losing his mind," Zeradine said coldly. "Isn't he?" Jareth leaned in, smelling of expensive cologne and malice. "Has he touched you, Duchess? Has he come to your bed? No, of course not. He is afraid. He knows that what he has is hereditary. He knows that any son he sires will be broken, just like him. He married you to secure the entailment, to stop me from claiming the title, but he has no intention of giving you a child. You are a broodmare for a ghost stud." "Get out," Zeradine whispered. "I'm leaving," Jareth smirked. "But mark me, Zeradine. The winter is coming, and when the fever takes him, when he's screaming in the dark, don't say I didn't warn you. The Duskmoor madness takes them all in the end." He tossed the letter onto the table and sauntered out. Zeradine stood frozen. The words madness and fever echoed in her ears. She thought of Hellion's coldness, his distance, the way he sometimes clenched his hand as if it were in pain. She didn't believe Jareth. Her father had been a liar, and she knew the scent of deceit. Jareth smelled of it. But there was a truth hidden in the lie. Hellion was hiding something terrible. She grabbed the letters and marched toward the West Wing. She was done with being invisible. The West Wing was forbidden. The heavy oak doors were usually locked, but tonight, in his distraction or haste, Isambard had left one slightly ajar. Outside, a storm was battering the coast. Thunder rattled the window panes, mirroring the turmoil in Zeradine's chest. She pushed the door open. The corridor was dark, lit only by a single sconce. The air here smelled different, sharp, medicinal, like willow bark and laudanum. "Hellion," she called out, her voice trembling. A crash came from a room at the end of the hall. The sound of glass shattering. Zeradine ran. She burst into the room to find a scene of chaos. A table had been overturned. Books were scattered, and Halion was on the floor, his back against the stone wall, his face a mask of agony. He was shaking. Violent, uncontrollable tremors racked his massive frame. His skin was gray, shining with sweat. His eyes squeezed shut. "No," he groaned through gritted teeth. "Get out, Isambard! Lock the door!" "Isambard isn't here," Zaradine said. She didn't flee. She didn't scream. She fell to her knees beside him. "Halion, look at me!" "Don't look," he gasped, turning his face away, shame radiating off him in waves. "Monster." Jareth said, "Monster." "You are not a monster," Zaradine said firmly. She saw the bottle of laudanum on the floor, spilled. He was in pain. This wasn't madness. It was physical agony. She grabbed a heavy woolen blanket from the divan and threw it over him. She pulled his head into her lap, stroking the damp hair back from his forehead. "Breathe. Halion, breathe." "The pain," he choked out. "My bones, like glass. It passes. It always passes." "Then we will wait for it to pass," she said. For an hour the storm raged outside and inside. Zaradine did not move. She held the Duke of Duskmoor while he shattered and put himself back together. She wiped his brow with her sleeve. She hummed a lullaby she used to sing to Xandria when they were children, and the creditors were banging on the doors. Slowly, the tremors subsided. Halion's breathing evened out. He opened his eyes. They were clear now, exhausted and unguarded. He looked up at her, realizing where he was, realizing who was holding him. He tried to pull away, but he was too weak. "You saw," he whispered, "the great Duke, broken." "I saw a man in pain," Zaradine corrected. "Is this what Jareth meant? The madness?" "It is not madness," Halion rasped. "It is a fever of the nerves, a legacy from my father. It comes with the stress, with the cold. It cripples me for hours. If the Board of Peers knew, if society knew I could not hold a pen, let alone a rifle, Jareth would have me declared unfit. He would take the title. He would strip the tenants, sell the mines, ruin everything." He looked at her with a desperate intensity. "I married you because I thought you were invisible. I thought you would stay in your rooms and let me hide this in peace. I thought you were weak enough to be ignored." Zaradine's heart stung, but she held his gaze. "You were wrong." "I know." Halion reached up, his hand trembling slightly as he touched her cheek. It was the first time he had touched her with tenderness. "You are not weak, Zaradine. You are the strongest thing in this house." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was ashamed," he admitted, the word tearing out of him. "To offer you this, a husband who breaks. I wanted you to have the title, the comfort, and none of the burden." Zaradine took his hand in hers, pressing it to her heart. The heat of him was grounding. "My father offered you the pretty one," she said softly. "He thought beauty was the only value, but you chose the one who knows how to survive the dark. Well, Halion, this is the dark, and I am not afraid of it." Halion stared at her, and for the first time the walls of the fortress crumbled. He pulled her down, burying his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in her scent of lavender and old paper. "Jareth is here," Zaradine whispered into his hair. "He was in the library." Halion stiffened. "He knows. He is pushing. He wants me to break in public." "Then we won't let him," Zaradine vowed, a fierce protectiveness rising in her chest. "You have a duchess now, Halion, and I have balanced ledgers far more complicated than a snake of a cousin." Halion pulled back, looking at her with a mix of wonder and relief. A small, crooked smile touched his lips, the first true smile she had ever seen. "I believe," the Duke said, "that I have made the greatest bargain of my life. The invitation to the Duskmoor Winter Solstice Ball was not merely a card. It was a summons to judgment. For generations, the Dukes of Duskmoor had held this feast to prove their vitality to the county. A night of fire and wine where the tenants were fed and the gentry were dazzled. For Helion, it had been a decade-long torture he avoided. "This year," Zeradine insisted. "If we hide, Jareth wins," she had said, her voice calm as she mended a tear in the velvet drapes of the west wing. Drapes she had opened to let the light in. "He feeds on shadows. We must starve him with light." But the light revealed things one might prefer remained hidden. 3 days before the ball, a carriage arrived. It was not the black, sleek vehicle of the Duke, but a gaudy, gilded thing that looked ridiculous against the stark, gray cliffs of Northumberland. Zeradine stood on the battlements, the sea wind whipping her cloak, and watched her past, roll up the driveway. "I did not invite them," Helion said, stepping up beside her. He looked healthier now. The shadows under his eyes had lessened, and though the tremor in his hands still came when the cold bit deep, he no longer hid it from her. He simply held out his hand, and she would take it, her steadiness grounding his storm. "Jareth did," Zeradine replied, her expression unreadable. "He knows that if anything can shake my composure, it is them." Isambard opened the carriage door. Baron Gawain Stonecliffe emerged, looking older and more desperate than Zeradine remembered. His coat was fine, but the cuffs were frayed, a detail only she would notice. Following him was Zandria. Zeradine's breath hitched. Zandria was still beautiful, breathtakingly so, but there was a brittleness to her. Her golden curls were pinned too tight. Her laugh as she greeted the footman was too high, shrill like a cracked bell. "Sister!" Zandria cried out as they entered the great hall, her voice echoing off the stone. She rushed forward, wrapping Zeradine in a cloud of heavy rose perfume. "Oh, look at you! You're so gray! I told Father the Duke would dress you in ashes. It matches the walls." "Welcome to Duskmoor, Zandria." "Father," Zeradine said, gently extricating herself. She stood tall, her spine a line of steel. She wore no jewels, only a simple gown of deep charcoal silk, but the keys to the castle hung at her waist, a symbol of authority Zandria did not understand. "Your Grace," Gawain bowed low to Helion, his eyes darting greedily around the hall, assessing the tapestries, the silver, the very mortar of the wealth he had failed to secure for himself. "We were overjoyed to receive your cousin's letter. To think, a family reunion, and just in time. The rumors in London, you know. They say you've become a hermit." I told them, "Nonsense, my daughter is a duchess. She wouldn't allow it." "Jareth is fond of rumors," Helion said coolly, "and even fonder of spending my money to entertain guests I did not summon. But you are here now. Isambard will show you to the guest wing." "The guest wing?" Zandria pouted. "But surely we are family. I thought I might have the rooms with the sea view." "Those are the Duchess's chambers," Helion said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the thunder that Zeradine loved. "And no one enters them but her." Dinner that night was an exercise in cruelty. Jareth sat opposite Helion, smiling like a wolf who smells blood. Gawain drank too much wine and boasted of investments that Zeradine knew were failing. Zandria spent the meal flirting with Jareth, desperate for the attention she wasn't getting from the Duke. "So, Zeradine," Jareth drawled, swirling his port, "how does it feel to be the mistress of such a demanding estate? My cousin has always been difficult to manage. Has he had one of his spells yet?" The table went silent. Gawain looked up, fork halfway to his mouth. "Spells? What's this?" "Didn't you know?" Jareth widened his eyes in mock innocence. "The Duskmoor blood is tainted. A nervous condition. Degenerative, some say. It's why he needed a nursemaid, not a wife. Isn't that right, Helion?" Helion's hand clenched around his glass. The stem snapped. Red wine bled onto the white tablecloth. The tremor started. Subtle at first. A vibration in his wrist, then traveling up his arm. Helion went pale, His jaw locked as he fought his own body. "Good God," Gawain whispered, horrified. "He's defected." Xandria recoiled. "Is it contagious?" Zaradine stood up. The scraping of her chair was loud in the hushed room. She walked to the head of the table. She didn't look at Jareth. She didn't look at her father. She took the napkin from her lap and gently covered the spilled wine, then placed her hand over Helion's trembling fist. She pressed down hard. "The solstice ball will proceed as planned," Zaradine announced, her voice ringing clear. "And at the ball, my husband will make the traditional toast. Until then, Cousin Jareth, I suggest you inspect the accounts. I found some discrepancies in your allowance that we must discuss." She signaled to Isambard. "Clear the table. The Duke and I are retiring." She pulled Helion up. He was shaking violently now, the stress of the humiliation triggering the attack. But he walked. He walked because she was holding him up. As they left the room, they heard Gawain hiss to Jareth, "You didn't tell me he was broken. I could have gotten more money for the girl if I'd known I was selling her to a cripple." Zaradine felt Helion flinch, but she didn't stop. She led him into the dark, where they were strongest. The night of the ball, Duskmoor was transformed. Zaradine had ordered 1,000 candles. Great boughs of holly and ivy draped the stone arches, and the fires roared in the hearths, driving back the winter chill. The local gentry arrived in a stream of carriages, eager to see the recluse Duke and his unexpected bride. Zaradine dressed with the help of a maid she had personally trained. Her gown was not gray tonight. It was midnight blue velvet, heavy and regal, slashed with silver, that caught the candlelight like stars. For the first time, she wore the Duskmoor diamonds, a heavy necklace that sat cold against her throat. She found Helion in the library. He was staring into the fire, dressed in formal black, his medals from the regiment gleaming. But his hands were hidden in white gloves. "I cannot do it, Zaradine," he said, not turning around. "The toast requires me to pour the wine from the founder's chalice. It weighs 5 pounds. If I drop it, Jareth wins. They will declare me unfit. The Board of Peers is already whispering." "Let them whisper," Zaradine said, walking to him. "Jareth has invited 3 members of the board tonight. He intends for you to fail. Then I should not go down there." "If you don't, you abdicate," she said firmly. She reached into her pocket. "Isambard and I made this." She held out a strip of dark leather, reinforced with steel, a brace. "Wear it under your sleeve," she instructed. "It will lock your wrist. It won't stop the pain, Helion, but it will steady the bone." Helion looked at the brace, then at her. "You would bind me together." "I would hold you together with my own hands if I had to," she whispered. "But you must stand. Not for the title, for us." He let her strap the brace onto his arm. He winced as she tightened it, but when he flexed his fingers, the tremor was contained. They descended the grand staircase together. The ballroom fell silent. The sight of them, the towering dark Duke, and his serene steeled Duchess, was striking. Xandria, standing by the punch bowl in a dress of shocking pink, looked suddenly childish and garish. The music began. They danced the opening waltz. Helion moved stiffly, his focus entirely on control, but Zaradine guided him, her hand firm on his shoulder, her eyes locking with his to ground him. Then came the moment. The music stopped. Isambard brought out the great chalice of Duskmoor, an ancient silver vessel filled with dark wine. Jareth stepped forward, a smirk playing on his lips. "Ladies and gentlemen, the moment we have awaited. Our noble Duke will now bless the house." He looked at Helion, his eyes gleaming with malice. "If he is able." Helion stepped up to the dais. He reached for the heavy chalice. Zaradine stood just behind him, close enough to touch, far enough to respect protocol. His hand gripped the silver handle. The weight was immense. The stress surged, and Zeradin saw the muscles in his neck cord as the spasm hit. The brace held his wrist, but the chalice began to vibrate. The wine rippled. A murmur went through the crowd. Jareth took a step forward, ready to catch the falling cup and claim victory. Suddenly, Zeradin stepped up beside Hellion. "In the history of Stonecliff," she said, her voice projecting to the back of the room, "we learned that a burden shared is half the weight. And in Duskmoor, we learned that a duke never stands alone." She reached out and placed her hand over his on the chalice. She didn't take it from him. She added her strength to his. Her fingers interlaced with his gloved ones. "Together, husband," she whispered. Hellion looked at her. The panic in his eyes receded, replaced by a fierce adoration. With her hand steadying his, the shaking stopped. The chalice rose, steady as a rock. "To Duskmoor!" Hellion roared, his voice returning to its full power. "And to the Duchess, the iron in its walls." "To the Duchess!" the crowd cheered, swept up in the romance of the moment. Hellion tipped the chalice and poured the libation perfectly into the waiting bowl. Not a drop was spilled. Jareth's face went slack. He had lost. But Zeradin was not done. She turned to the crowd, still holding the chalice. "And as we celebrate, we must also purge the rot that threatens our harvest. Isambard?" The valet stepped forward, holding a sheaf of papers. "My lords," Isambard addressed the board members, "these are the unauthorized bills of sale for the Westvale lead rights, signed not by the Duke, but forged by Mr. Jareth Hollowhall, along with evidence of bribes paid to the local magistrate to ignore the theft." The room erupted. Jareth went pale. He turned to run, but two burly footmen blocked his path. "Tainted blood indeed," Hellion said softly to his cousin. "Greed is a sickness, Jareth, and I believe it is fatal to your ambitions." The morning after the ball, the air was crisp and clean. The storm had passed, leaving the sky a brilliant, hard blue. Jareth was gone, escorted by the magistrate to a holding cell in York. The scandal would rock the county for months. But the Duke's reputation was unassailable. He was the hero who had overcome illness and treachery, saved by the love of a devoted wife. In the drawing room of Duskmoor, the final reckoning was taking place. Baron Gawain sat by the fire, nursing a headache and a bruised ego. Zandria was pacing, her pink dress from the night before looking crumpled and sad. "We are leaving," Zeradin said. She stood by the window, the morning sun illuminating her profile. She no longer looked like a shadow. She looked like the sun itself, cold and bright. "Leaving?" Gawain sputtered. "But Zeradin, surely, after last night. The Duke is generous? I am his father-in-law. The mines, the debts—" "The debts are forgiven as promised," Zeradin said. "You may keep Stonecliff, but the mines revert to the Duskmoor estate, and you will receive a stipend. Enough to live comfortably, but not enough to gamble. If you ask for a penny more, I will cut it off entirely." "You ungrateful wretch!" Gawain stood up, his face reddening. "I made you, I sold you to him." "You sold me like a piece of furniture you didn't want." Zeradin turned to face him. "And it was the best thing you ever did, because you gave me to a man who knows my worth." She looked at Zandria. Her sister stopped pacing. For the first time, Zandria looked at Zeradin, not with pity, but with envy. "He loves you," Zandria whispered. "He actually loves you. I thought he just needed a nurse." "He needed a partner," Zeradin said gently. "Beauty fades, Zandria. The sun sets every day. But the stone endures. You are free now. Father cannot sell you again, because I control the purse strings. Find a man who loves you for your mind, not your face. If you have one left to find." It was a harsh mercy, but a mercy nonetheless. Zeradin watched them leave from the front steps. As the carriage rolled away, Gawain sulking, Zandria weeping softly, She felt the last tether to her old life snap. She was free. She felt a heavy coat drape over her shoulders. Helion stepped up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her head. "They are gone?" he asked. "They are gone." "Isambard tells me the servants are calling you the Iron Duchess," Helion murmured, kissing her temple. "It suits you. And you." Zaradine turned in his arms, looking up at his face. The lines of pain were smoothing out. The fear was gone. "How are the tremors?" Helion held up his hand. It was steady. "You quiet them, Zaradine. You are the anchor. When you are near, the storm doesn't break." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. "I realized I never gave you a proper betrothal gift. I asked your father for the pretty one, and he gave me the perfect one. But I want to give you something that is yours alone." He opened the box. Inside lay a brooch. It was not a diamond or a ruby. It was a sprig of hellebore, crafted in white gold and moonstones. The flower that blooms in the winter, the flower that survives the frost. "For the woman who knows the dark," Helion said softly, pinning it to her breast over her heart. Zaradine covered his hand with hers. She looked out at the rugged, wild beauty of Duskmoor, then up at her husband, the beast who had learned to be a man. "The dark is not so frightening, Helion," she smiled, a radiant, rare expression that transformed her face into something far beyond beautiful. "Not when you have someone to hold the candle." Years later, the legend of the Iron Duchess would be told in every parlor in Northumberland. They would speak of how she tamed the wolf of Duskmoor, not with beauty, but with a spine of steel and a heart of quiet grace. Zandria eventually married a country parson and found happiness in a simple life, far from the London seasons she once craved. Baron Gawain died boasting of his daughter the Duchess, never understanding that he was the villain of her story. But in the high tower of Duskmoor, Zaradine and Helion cared nothing for legends. They only cared for the truth, that in a world obsessed with the glittering surface, the greatest treasure is often hidden in the shadows, waiting for the one wise enough to look. If you enjoyed this story of redemption, hidden strength, and true love triumphing over vanity, please like this video and subscribe for more historical romances. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that their worth is not in how they are seen, but in who they are.